This is our league, and this is your league. From the 55-yard line on CFL America Radio and the Sports History Network.
From the 55-yard line, it is full color football here on Gridiron America Radio. And I am pleased to introduce to you a podcast, an interview that I did this morning with Brett Forrest, the author of Long Bomb, detailed history of the XFL, the first version of the XFL. His book has recently been re-released. It's now also available in addition to hardcover, which you can still find, the original. It's now also available in Kindle and audiobook and also in paperback. So please enjoy this conversation I had with Brett this morning. And without further ado, on to the interview.
The XFL is going to be the extra fun league.
Some have called it an unprecedented television event. Others have called it a desperate ploy for ratings.
They hate me, baby. They hate me.
The XFL is accused of selling out the dark side of gratuitous violence, tawdry titillation, lousy football, and scripted low-life garbage.
Get up and get out there! Anything McMahon touches turns to you-know-what.
This will be a blast.
An anxious nation awaits.
Well, good afternoon, Brett. It's afternoon there. It's about 5 o'clock there and out on the East Coast, right?
That's right. We're it's one of those Sunday late afternoon, early evening where you can start getting that feeling like, oh no, work week is coming back.
Oh yeah, I know that feeling well. It's Monday morning, early Monday morning here in Japan, so the workday is upon. I can actually hear outside the house. I can hear, Monday already starting up on the highway. So thanks for sitting down with me. And before we went on, actually, right as I was waking up, I was going through the your new Kindle edition of your book and everything. Looking actually, and what I was looking at was the quotes by people who read your book, Chris Berman and those guys. And the one thing that the one word that stood out to me in all those reviews about the XFL and about your book was you basically showed the hubris of Vince McMahon and everybody associated with the league. So first question though is, how did the new book come about? The revised book, the reissue of the book, I should say.
Sure. Great question, Greg. Just thank you very much for having me on. It's great to have a chance to talk about all this stuff because this book is near and dear to me. It came out so long ago now, and it's great that the XFL came back for the third time and has given us a chance to discuss all these interesting topics. So basically, when I heard that The Rock had bought and partners had bought the XFL and were planning to relaunch it for that third time, I thought, the original book had only come out in hardcover, and I had gotten the rights back from the publisher, and I said, let's go ahead and put it out in the 3 other versions. I recorded an audiobook, and we did the ebook and the paperback, and I just figured, it's such an interesting sports topic. I mean, it was such a flash in the pan, but it tried to reinvent the way that we watch sports on TV. It's failed spectacularly. But it kind of remains this curious little thing in American sports history. And I thought that it would reissuing the book would give me an opportunity to put a new forward in there that would give 20 years perspective on the league.
Right.
Now we can actually look back and say, all right, it didn't work, it failed terribly, but what did it give us? And it actually gave us a few interesting things that still remain with us today on TV sports.
Oh yeah, yeah. And it was very much, it was an experiment, obviously, that, to this day, I mean, every new iteration, every new football league brings some new iteration that, big league adopts, and then it allows us not only so much football, but all the other sports too. When you started the book, you were a young guy, and you moved out to Vegas, and you followed the Vegas team. Let's start from there in terms of, you were there at the very beginning, you witnessed it.
Mm-hmm.
What was it like? What was that experience that first? And were you going to all the training camps too beforehand and watching that and talking to the coaches and?
Mm-hmm. Well, it goes back just a touch before that. So I was living in New York, and I was a freelance magazine writer back in the days when you could actually make a living doing that. I got an assignment from a magazine to go, to write about this new football league that was just coming together. This was before the league started, and I went out to Vegas. And I went to practices, and I remember sitting on the bleachers at the practice field, and up walks Dick Butkus onto the bleachers. There's like nobody really else there, and I just walked over, introduced myself, and found him to be. He looks very intimidating, and we all know his football past, but he's just a very open, normal, cool guy, and so I started chatting with him there, and my main question was, why would a guy like Dick Butkus, who is, in the book, I call him like the face of pro football, why would he get involved with Vince McMahon? That was the question I wanted to know. I wanted to answer, because Vince, as we know, was a wrestling promoter. He'd come, his product was staged,
Right.
So why did Dick Butkus want to work for Vince McMahon? That's kind of where it started. I remember on the plane ride back to New York after reporting that magazine article, thinking, you know what, this could be an interesting book, because what Dick Ebersol, who was the president of NBC Sports, and Vince McMahon are doing, or trying to do, is completely reinvent sports for TV, much like Monday Night Football on ABC, which was led by Roone Arledge, who was the mentor to Dick Ebersol in his younger career. Much like Monday Night Football really did reinvent the way we watched sports on TV. Vince and Dick were trying to do the same thing with the XFL. So I thought, if this thing works, it could be a hell of a book, and if it doesn't, that could be kind of funny and interesting as well.
Yeah.
Well, that's kind of where it began. And I got the book deal, and I just thought, man, two things I thought about Vegas. I thought it's a great setting, because Vince and Dick, I mean, not to be too, but they're making a big gamble here. They're taking a big gamble.
Yeah.
But also, I mean, I just want to live in Vegas. I thought it'd be cool. So I thought it would give more color to the book, at least the portions of it in which I talk about the players.
Yeah. And so during those first days, what was the feel? Was there excitement? Or, all I know is what I saw on TV and what I read behind the scenes with your book. But what was it like being there? Were there hints that this might, at the very beginning, this might not come up, might go as well as hoped? Or
it was actually very interesting, because anyone who was around back then and remembers the before the league began, the fact that it was NBC married with the WWF, as it was called then, they were they were each co-owners at 50% of the league. So the fact that they owned it, meant that they had the desire and the ability to publicize it before it began in a way that probably nothing's ever been publicized before, because also this was in the days when the stock market was on an incredible boom. Vince McMahon had taken WWF public, and the stock listing, the stock value had made him a billionaire. Mm-hmm. And the WWF at that point was its most popular in its history. Yeah. So there were an incredible amount of eyeballs watching what Vince was doing. Dick Ebersol, of course, had the power of NBC behind him. So they hyped it and hyped it and hyped it, and it got everybody really interested. Yeah. And it wasn't like saying we're going to launch the Arena League. A lot of people thought, like I did, this thing actually could be revolutionary. It might work. And so the first game took place in Vegas. Yeah. And it was, locally it was a sellout. And it drew a huge rating. It drew a huge rating for the first half because people came in huge numbers, and what they saw displeased them.
Yeah, and it was not a good game. I mean, I was, you and I were part of those eyeballs. Well, you were actually, I'm assuming you were at the game, right?
I wasn't at the game. I was signing the book deal and was I headed out like a couple of days later to Vegas.
Oh, okay.
On TV like everyone else.
Yeah. So people, if I remember correctly, people were tuning out after that first half. They were because of the game. The game itself, it was very uncompetitive.
Yes, and that's the thing. I mean, when the ratings came out and were released publicly in the days following the game, NBC and WWF made a big deal about them because they had guaranteed advertisers a certain number, and for the first game rating was well above that number. Mm-hmm. So they touted that number, but privately in the offices, they knew, looking more closely at the data, that it didn't bode well because, as you mentioned, immediately people started tuning out because it didn't reinvent the way we watch football. Right. And not only that, it was kind of hokey because the bits that Vince kind of imported from pro wrestling didn't really mesh with real football. So it was a disjointed effort, but that also goes back into how the league was conceived, right? And how much time they gave themselves to actually put it together. Yeah. It was a bit of a rush job.
Yeah, and for those who don't know, I mean, I learned through your book. I mean, I had always heard rumors. Now, again, this was before we had Twitter and before we had social media. I mean, the world that we live in now is so much different. Yep. Than what it was back then.
Big time, yeah.
But there's that whole CFL Toronto Argonauts component that, honestly, when I read your book right after, I'm like, I didn't know that. That made okay, because the question that I had when that league first started up. Now I was in my early 30s, getting ready. I was literally in between jobs, same career, different agencies, and I'm like, why would he start up a league? I mean, that was my question. Why? I mean, because again, the USFL, the World League of American Football, did not work. Why is this happening? But, explain, because there's the Toronto Argonauts, and I don't know how much you follow the CFL right now, but, the Toronto Argonauts are the flagship franchise of the CFL. Yeah. They've always struggled. They've been struggling at the gate for years now. Yep. But back then, the Canadian Football League has always had its financial issues and struggles, but it's always muddled through. But back then, Vince wanted to buy the Argos. What happened from there?
Well, it's a fascinating backstory, and that's what I love about doing this kind of work is that you get paid to look into things. And often you uncover these just fascinating aspects of these stories that you think but then they kind of blossom into something else. So it actually starts a little bit before that. So okay. Vince wanted to buy an NFL team. Vince McMahon wanted to be an NFL owner, and the Minnesota Vikings were for sale. And he tried hard to make that happen for himself. But the thing is, the other owners, the other NFL owners, this is a select club,
Right.
and they didn't much care for Vince, and he felt snubbed by the experience. And it was shortly after that the CFL and the Argos approached Vince.
Oh, okay.
They approached him, and they asked him if he'd be interested in buying the Toronto Argonauts.
Okay. It's been a long time, so my apologies. I forgot about that part. Yeah.
Well, it gets more interesting, actually, because Vince said, I'm not interested in buying the Argonauts, but you know what I am interested in? I'd like to buy the CFL. So he tried to buy the entire CFL. Now, remember, he'd just become a billionaire. He was more successful in his pro wrestling business and all the other side businesses that he'd developed off of that than he'd ever been. So we get back to this hubris that we talked about, right?
Right.
Hubris maybe is a bit judgmental, but let's say confidence. He was very confident, right?
Yeah.
And he had big ideas. I think it's great when people have big ideas.
Mm-hmm.
And his big idea was, I want to, if I can't own an NFL team, I want to own the CFL. Well, the CFL, they talked back and forth with him on it, and they declined his offer. So at that point, Vince is already really revved up on the pro football idea. He's tried 2 different things. They haven't worked out. He's determined to do it. And then he found a perfect partner in NBC, which we can discuss.
Yeah. And him and Ebersol had been friends. If I remember correctly, they had been friends well before the football league. They had been, because when they got back, and I remember back in high school, they had was it Saturday night? Oh yeah, it was Saturday Night Wrestling that was on NBC when Saturday Night Live was on hiatus or reruns. Is that where that friendship started?
Yeah, it's actually a very interesting story. I might get the name incorrect, but I think it was called Saturday Night Main Event.
That's right. Yeah, it was.
Is that right?
Yeah, that sounds right.
I'm pretty sure that's what it was. I would love to be corrected on that if that's wrong. But this, that's an interesting story, because what happened was Vince McMahon in the 80s. You remember in the 80s, pro wrestling, he brought pro wrestling to another level of sort of broad societal acceptance and popularity.
Yeah.
With Hulk Hogan and the Iron Sheik and all those crazy characters.
As a high school student, I went to several wrestling events up at the Allstate Arena up in Chicago. So I remember well. Yeah, it was back in the 80s, and that's the thing. We live in such a different world now, but people forget how we only had so many channels, so many cable channels. We didn't have social media, so what you saw on TV was pretty much. But wrestling just exploded, and that first WrestleMania was a big deal. The second, and it just kept getting bigger, and that was
Vince. That was Vince McMahon. I mean, he was incredibly effective, and creative, and he was a huge success. And his idea was, let's further take pro wrestling, because if I can go back just a touch, pro wrestling in sort of toward the turn of the century and up to like World War II and even after, pro wrestling was actually really popular in the United States.
Yeah.
But then it kind of went through a downturn and it became kind of ghettoized. He brought it out of that. He made it broadly popular, and now he wanted to take it. He wanted to put it on network TV. And Dick Ebersol was the head of. I can't remember exactly his job title, because he was at one point he was in the entertainment division. He had been instrumental in creating Saturday Night Live with Lorne Michaels, and but later switched to the sports division.
Right.
Anyhow, Vince McMahon proposes this to contacts of his at NBC. The request makes its way to Dick Ebersol. He's never met Vince McMahon, and he thinks it's ridiculous. He says, "No way in hell am I going to do that." And the next day, he's walking down a hallway in NBC in one of the buildings, I think at 30 Rock and he runs into David Letterman. And he says, "Hey, David, you'll never believe this. That guy Vince McMahon, you know, the crazy wrestling guy, he wants to put something on NBC." And David Letterman said, "Well, hold on a second." He said, "Actually, Vince and I have the same agent, and it's not a crazy idea." And he reminded Ebersol that Letterman had some of his biggest ratings when Andy Kaufman and Jerry Lawler went on the show, and they had concocted that whole feud. Remember, Andy Kaufman wrestling women, and then he finally wrestled Jerry Lawler, and Lawler won. And I remember Kaufman was on Letterman's show with a neck brace.
Yeah.
Lawler slapped him. I mean, it was great slapstick comedy, you know, and people weren't sure if it was real. So Letterman reminded Ebersol, hold on a second. This stuff is actually kind of funny. Not only that, it's really popular.
Right.
So that made Dick Ebersol think twice. He called Vince McMahon in for a meeting, and they hit it off instantly and became, you know, fast friends. And then, you know, they agreed to put it on the network.
Okay. Yeah. And we saw that friendship come through in that documentary, about 5 years ago. So that's always been a part of, I mean, that part of the story is one of those that, it's interesting because there's a friendship, and it, you know, going to that documentary, you know, people talk about it and write about it, but when you see those two talking, these guys are genuinely friends. They genuinely like and even love each other. I mean, as buddies can be. So, so week one kicked off, the warning signs were there. From there, take us through, and there's 10 weeks, and obviously we're not going to go week by week. Talking here. So kind of what happened next after the week one? Where did kind of things flow from there?
Well, the TV professionals in the room, and I'm talking about mostly the people at NBC, they realized pretty much right away that they had a serious problem on their hands, because the main mistake, I mean, there were many mistakes that these guys made, but the main mistake, I think, was putting it on network TV in prime time. Because when you put it in that time slot, the bar for success is very high in terms of viewership. If they had started out, when this was Vince's original plan, on cable, then they could have developed an audience over time, possibly.
Right.
But when you get set up on Saturday night on NBC, you know, in prime time, you don't have time to develop anything.
Yeah.
You have to deliver almost immediately. And then people at NBC saw what we just discussed, which is a huge opening rating decreasing rapidly throughout the game. So from then on, it was kind of like they had been strapped into the roller coaster, and there was no way off of it. And they just had to ride the thing out, because fundamentally what you had sort of poorly conceived comic bits paired with what essentially was minor league football.
Right.
And it just didn't really fly.
Yeah. I mean, you had Jesse Ventura in the booth, which added an element. Yeah, Jesse's entertaining. And he is, you know, I mean, does know his football. I mean, we do know that from previous years. If I remember correctly, he was calling games for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers under his, not under his stage name, but whatever, I forget his real name, way back in the day. So he knew his football, but when they had him in the booth, it was the wrestler Jesse Ventura. And it it came off as, it was not a good look.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that I think one of the many things that people forget about the league is that Jesse Ventura was, while he was calling the games for the XFL, he was the governor of Minnesota.
Yeah.
It's crazy when you think back on it.
Yeah.
But I like Jesse. I've always been a fan of his. I got to speak with him a couple of times when I was reporting the book. He was very gracious. And I have a lot of respect for him. I mean, the guy was a Navy SEAL. Has great success as a pro wrestler, and transitioned into a movie actor, and then politics. I mean, everywhere he's gone, he's been very successful.
Yeah.
So I love the idea of his getting involved. There were sort of two problems. One is that, as you pointed out, he wasn't really calling football. He was trying to be a heel.
He was
often.
he was being the body.
Yeah, he was being the body, and the other thing is that, he was the color commentator, so you needed actual play-by-play announcers, real professional
Right.
television play-by-play announcers, but no real experienced people like that wanted to go anywhere near a project that involved Vince McMahon. For example, like Bob Costas worked for NBC at the time. There was absolutely no way he was going to get involved with this. So what they ended up with was a guy who's gone on to a really great career since the XFL, named Matt Vasgersian. But when he was working as play-by-play guy for the XFL, he wasn't very experienced.
Right.
He was also feeling, I think, a little intimidated by Vince McMahon, who was often in his ear during games, telling him like, "Say this now," and so. And that's exactly why a lot of guys in his shoes didn't want to take the job. But so you basically had this inexperienced guy who was a little bit rattled, with Jesse the Body, who was being the body. So everything was all confused and muddled.
Yeah, and the only thing missing, I think, at the time really was Mean Gene Okerlund. It seemed like
Right.
that was the one missing part. Like we had everything else. I mean, we had the cheerleaders like they promised. Which, really now looking back at it, very cringeworthy. Just the things that, I mean.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny you think about Mean Gene. Maybe do we need to explain who that is for people?
We might have to. You and I both obviously are of the same age, and well, you explain. You're
okay. So
better than me.
Mean Gene played like the sort of straight announcer for WWF. Like he would go to the wrestlers between matches as if it was a real interview, and he was basically the guy who would give each wrestler a chance to fulminate and yell and scream and talk about vendettas and all that, and then he would give some sort of pronouncement. But I remember he would always stand there, and he was a balding man, and you'd have like Hulk Hogan or something standing next to him, and always, Mean Gene, I'll tell you this, Mean Gene, I'll tell you that. So, but it's interesting you mention it, because what if they had him during the 2001 XFL, and what if the players had bought into that? Because I think ultimately that's what it was supposed to be.
Yeah, that's a good point.
It was supposed to be, the playing football, coming off the field, and talking to a Mean Gene Okerlund type figure, kind of as a wrestler, but being a pro football player, and that never materialized.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, and with had Mean Gene been part of that, it might have. I mean, it might. Yeah, very well. I mean, you never. It's kind of like a funny what if, because he brought when it came to wrestling broadcasts, I like to watch what was going on with Mean Gene, how he handled the whole circus around him. And he was able to direct traffic, and it worked well. But yeah.
But the thing is, he had willing partners, and
right.
It's interesting to think about, because, like, think back. I'm just as an example. Think back to like the 1970s Oakland Raiders and all the characters they had on their team, and their teams back then. I mean, these guys they were tough on the field. They were sometimes dirty on the field, and and some of these guys, when they came off the field, they spoke their minds. That type of pro athlete is gone.
Yeah,
the type of pro athlete who's candid, who's fearless behind the microphone.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. I mean, nearly all of our pro athletes now are so watered down. They do all this media training. They're trained not to say anything that's going to get them into trouble, or really show any of their character at all.
Yeah.
So I think. And that dates back to 2001 also. And so I think that hope that or plan that was going to come about is, a little bit anachronistic.
Yeah. And two, you also had coaches. I mean, you had Jesse trying to go to, I think it was a New York coach, into some type of, I forget exactly the nature of it, and the coach wanted nothing to do with it, made it very clear. And
well, that goes back to your earlier question, kind of where did things go after week one showed itself to be kind of like a harbinger of things to come. Well, that was one thing that they cooked up. They thought, well, if we can get Jesse to start some kind of feud with the coach of the New York team, maybe people will think that's interesting and tune in. And it was so transparent what they were trying to do on air as a viewer. And it just never worked because the coach, he's a football coach, and he knew, because I remember I talked to him a few times, and he knew that the league, might not last, to put it charitably.
Right.
And he was going to go have to look for another job.
Yeah.
And if potential employers associated him with some sort of clownish behavior with Jesse Ventura, that was going to limit his opportunities.
Right. And going to and talking about that with people, I mean, the sports section, the sports people did not cover the XFL at all.
A little bit. They didn't cover. You're right. Actually, I think this is important distinction. Most of them did not cover it like they would the established sports leagues.
Right. That's what I was trying to say.
By that I mean, sorry to cut you off there.
Oh no, it's okay.
By that I mean, like, they weren't sending beat writers to the games. They wrote about the XFL. Everybody wrote about the XFL.
Right.
But it was more to sort of like dance on Vince McMahon's grave.
Yeah.
As the ratings went, further south week by week.
Yeah, I know in Chicago it was covered, but there was always, it was towards the back. Oh yeah, here's what's going on. Oh, they're practicing in a park. Nice. Yeah, this isn't. It was one of the. It wasn't so much what was said; it was the tone of how it was said, and that seemed to be, as the weeks went on, the headlines and back in the newspapers when people read newspapers.
Yeah.
That was the constant tone every Monday as to this is not going well. This does not look good. And I can't remember. So there was a game. It was a Saturday night game that went over. And you had Saturday Night Live was scheduled to go live that night. That explained how that went, because that did not go well.
No, it didn't go well. And I'm trying to remember, it was Jennifer Lopez, I think, was the host. And this was when Jennifer Lopez was just becoming this huge star in both music and movies. Probably sort of the most exciting person that they had to host the show that year. And she had a new movie coming out, so it was a big opportunity for her as well. When they originally discussed the idea of the league at NBC, they had to speak with Lorne Michaels, because they were putting, and Lorne Michaels is sort of the creator and the executive producer.
Right.
So they had to speak with him because they were putting the XFL right before the local evening news. So
Navy parlance, they were about ready to move into his lane.
Exactly. So the XFL was supposed to end at like 11, and then all local stations would cut to their local news from 11 to 11:30, and Saturday Night Live comes on then. Well, Lorne Michaels was concerned, rightfully so, as it turned out, that he's like, okay, well, this isn't like a sitcom where we know where it's like pre-recorded. This is a live event, and we don't know when it's going to end, really. Yeah. So can you give me some guarantees that it's not going to push into Saturday Night Live? And they, Ebersol, quote unquote, guaranteed it. But what happened was that week, that game went into overtime. Now, so eventually what happened was it pushed the local evening news back, and then the start time of Saturday Night Live was pushed back. So it meant that as a viewer on the East Coast or in the Eastern time zone, it didn't start for you until after midnight Saturday Night Live. Okay. And Lorne Michaels was steamed. Now they couldn't cut the game because there's a regulation with the FCC going back again to the Oakland Raiders.
And the New York Jets game, the Heidi game.
Yeah. So the Raiders had been down by a lot of points late in the game, and they cut away to this movie Heidi, and then the Raiders came back and won. So ever since that point, the networks aren't allowed to cut away from games. So So anyway, yeah. So basically, the XFL started like negatively impacting NBC's real business, if you will.
Right. And was that before? And I can't remember. Was that before or after? Going back to talking about Bob Costas,
Yeah.
where Vince had that, shall we say, very interesting interview with Bob Costas.
Yeah. Yeah.
That it's great. It's one of those things, if you can find it on YouTube, it's fun to watch because the madder Vince gets, the calmer Costas gets.
Yeah, it's really entertaining TV for sure. That interview came after the SNL debacle, if I'm not mistaken. And yeah, see Bob Costas, especially at that time. I mean, Bob Costas is he's sort of out of the limelight these days, but back then he was, you might say, he was the number one sports broadcaster in the country.
Yeah, when we heard Costas, you knew it was probably something. He's kind of like, I would say he's bigger than Joe Buck, but I mean, he's kind of like with Joe Buck today. You hear Joe Buck, Joe Buck's associated maybe with, but yeah, Costas, he was pretty big back in the day.
Costas was huge. It's interesting that you mentioned Joe Buck. I mean, I think, of course, they're different people. When you hear Joe Buck, it's a big event,
right?
But Joe Buck isn't the journalist that Bob Costas is.
Right.
That's the difference.
He's not the historian either, even though, Buck has a bit of historian in him because of his dad in St. Louis and growing up around baseball. But Costas, true historian, journalist, historian, broadcaster. I mean,
yes, exactly. Now, Joe Buck, this is not a knock on him, but his style is more like he promotes what you're watching, right?
Right.
Whereas Costas does that, but he also calls people out when he feels like it's necessary. And he never was any kind of fan of Vince McMahon's. And it's just like you said, it's great TV because he basically he gets McMahon in a small studio. They're sitting very close to one another. I think there's a little coffee table between them. And Costas just sort of like, one example after another, just picks Vince apart about the XFL, but also about some things that he's seen on the WWF. And McMahon immediately falls into his Mr. McMahon character, the boss that he played at WWF, and tries to intimidate Costas by sort of inching his seat closer, sort of becoming sort of like a more imposing physical figure, yelling at him. And like you said, it's really incredible because I think almost anybody in that situation, in Costas's situation, would grow a little nervous, right?
Yeah.
But Costas he was such a professional, so smooth, and really stood his ground. It is great to watch.
And do you think that was kind of anybody who was watching, anybody who did, is that where I think we all knew that the end was not near for the league, or did that come later? Because I get, and the reason why I asked, pardon me,
because NBC allowed that interview to happen in that way, or
that, and just the general overall feel like, oh, this is going to go south real quick, even further south.
Yeah, well, I think it is notable that this interview took place on the very network that was broadcasting XFL games.
Yeah.
So I know that there were a lot of people within NBC Sports and in NBC at large who were really embarrassed by the XFL, and they thought that it was costing the network some prestige. So I'm sure, and I don't know this for I don't know this for sure. I haven't checked this. I didn't check it at the time, but I would imagine that there were people who worked there who were really glad that Bob Costas did that, because it basically said, "Hey, Bob Costas represents NBC. You don't represent NBC."
Right.
But look, I think certainly people who worked at the network, they knew that this thing just wasn't viable.
Right.
But the people at WWF thought differently.
Right.
Because they knew, especially the people who were close to Vince and were involved in the early development of the project, because they knew that the first, the original concept was to go on cable, as I mentioned earlier. So a lot of people at the WWF said, okay, this first season is sort of a write-off because NBC, they turned this thing into something it's not.
Yeah.
Let's go back to the original plan in season 2 and let's go on cable.
And they were on other networks, UPN, and I think it was at the Nashville network at the time. Might have been. It was one of the other cable outlets. They had games. I mean, there was obviously only 8 teams, so they had one game or maybe 2 games. I can't remember on NBC, but they were also having games on the other channels. And I remember watching them, in my Chicago apartment on UPN. So, I mean, I knew it wasn't just, obviously, it just wasn't just NBC broadcasting the games, but NBC being the primary one. How do you recall how the ratings were on those other channels?
They were actually acceptable, those ratings. And by acceptable, I mean, some of these smaller cable channels, they exist on this broad landscape of the cable world where programming that people are going to watch is sometimes hard to develop, hard to buy, etc.
Right.
So people were actually watching some XFL games on some of those networks at numbers that were kind of pretty good and were better than some other programs that these networks were running.
Right. Yeah, it just seemed to me, I mean, it just seemed like it was a better product on the other channels. I don't know if it was just the feel. I mean, maybe I don't remember why I felt that way, but I do recall watching a San Francisco game, and I think it might have been, there's a lot of talk right now, the game as we're talking, the St. Louis Battlehawks are playing, apparently what the Rock said is the largest spring crowd ever to witness an XFL or a spring or a game in spring, which is a total lie. Hell, he didn't even remember the history of his own league because there was a game in San Francisco that I think that had about 38,000. So, so the games themselves, I mean, were relatively well attended by minor league football standards. Or even by CFL. I'm going to even use CFL standards because I love the CFL and they've always had attendance issues. But just looking at the attendance, they did well attendance wise. But yeah, on those other channels, it seemed like it was better. I don't know, for whatever reason, it didn't come off as gimmicky. And I guess that was what I remember.
That's what I recall too. There seemed to be the fewer antics. Than NBC, because there's so many interesting aspects to this league, and here's another one. So when things started going down the tubes, of course they were trying to figure out, okay, is there a way to right the ship in the time remaining to us? And about halfway through the season or so, Vince and Dick had a lot of conversations about this, and they were actually of different minds, because Vince was looking at the numbers and doing focus groups and all that. And he decided that they had to do away with all the pro wrestling stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And they had to focus just on football, because he thought that that's what viewers liked. And he thought that could retain viewers and maybe attract new ones. Whereas Dick Ebersol, strangely enough, the established sports guy, he wanted to up all the crazy, wrestling. So they just couldn't come to an agreement, and it showed.
Yeah, and then ultimately, the season wound. Okay, so we're getting to the end here, getting to the playoffs, and then you got the $1 million game. Now I've watched that game on YouTube, and I don't see any crowd. I just see a TV, because the way they did the angle. My first question, because I got up real early this morning, so I didn't have time. That was one of the questions I wanted to check before I talked to you. How many people went to that game? Do you recall?
Well, I don't remember the number. I'd have to look in the book. I mean, it was a few years ago, but I myself was there. And I remember I wanted to walk into, because it was the LA Coliseum, which everybody knows is this just enormous bowl.
Right.
It's a miracle that it's still there, because it's incredibly out of date.
Yeah.
And it has a track around it, so the fans are quite far from the field. But I remember walking into the stadium, high atop the stadium, one of the top tunnels there, and it was just, there was nobody there. Nobody.
My God.
I remember talking to one of the security guards, and he said, we get bigger crowds for high school football games here. Yeah, and I just also remember eventually making my way to the field, and I saw Vince and Dick on the sideline. So I walked up and just kind of stood next to them and kind of eavesdropped a little bit, and just was just watching, like, what's their mood? This thing is over now. This thing has been very embarrassing for them. And they seemed kind of relieved.
Yeah.
I mean, you looked around the stadium. There were some good players on the field. The game, as I recall, was
Right.
pretty.
Yeah.
And guys who on to play in the NFL. But you looked around, and there was just no one. No one cared. No
What
one.
what if you threw a championship game and nobody showed up? That's
Right. Right.
it's almost. Did you ever read George R.R. Martin's short story, The Last Super Bowl?
No, it sounds good though.
I'll after we go offline, I'll get you the link
Please
where
do.
you can find it. But that's what it reminds me of, how that story starts. And what if you throw it and nobody shows up? So, but yeah, it's so you said they looked relieved, and I don't remember how long after that game did they the decision to pull the plug was made.
Well, NBC announced that decision quickly, that it wasn't going to be on NBC, but the WWF people were determined to have a second season on cable, as I mentioned. So Vince and his folks were negotiating with the networks, or these cable networks,
right.
And it was also really, it was connected to his wrestling programs, because these deals, they're just interconnected. Like, okay, if you want this wrestling program, you got to take the XFL, and here are the ad rates, and here.
Yeah.
So it gets a little bit complicated, but it looked like it was going to happen. And Vince actually invited all of the coaches and all of the senior staff to Stamford, Connecticut, 1 week, where WWF headquarters were. And so they were planning sort of what's going to happen now during the off season. They were thinking about the next draft they were going to have, discussion of rule changes, all those sorts of issues would go over. And so all those guys were there. And when Vince came into one of these meeting rooms, and actually they were planning all to go to the Yankees game together that night. And they all had tickets. I think the vans were waiting outside. Vince came in and he said, XFL's dead. Because what had happened was, I think I'd have to go back to the book, but I believe it was UPN. UPN, if I'm not mistaken, at that point bought Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Oh, that does sound familiar.
They put it in the time slot that the XFL was going to go into, because it was simply a bigger draw.
Right.
And in the end, that's what killed the XFL the first time around, Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Oh my God. Yeah, that's right. I do remember that now. You're bringing back. Yeah, that was. Yeah. And back then, I mean, it's not like you had streaming now to count on. I mean, things have changed so much.
Yeah.
So fast forward, and we'll fast forward here to almost 20 years then. Vince decides to restart the XFL. And clearly he learned lessons from the first go around. And when that league kicked off, I mean, I followed that league, the new league. I'm like, okay, because I'm thinking, oh, well, he clearly has learned his lessons he clearly read your book and learned lessons. Because
I don't think he needed to do that to realize how he'd messed up.
Well, your book is one of those where, when again, social media is big and everybody's talking about. I mean, there's a cult following of the original XFL.
Okay.
And now all these, everybody's coming. Oh, the XFL's back! Great, great, great. And I would be on social media going, "Have you read Brett Forrest's book about the first league?" No. Okay, maybe you should before you get too excited about what's coming up next. But with that said, it clearly there were innovations that Vince brought. I mean, the second time around was purely business. He
Yeah.
handed off to Oliver Luck. You handle everything. Hell, Vince came out for a press conference and wasn't playing the heel, was playing the businessman that we kind of all expected him to be. And it seemed like, man, they had done their homework, they had done their marketing research, but obviously that all went to basically shit 5 weeks into the season because the world changed.
Yeah. I mean, I don't hold that against them. The failure of that iteration of the league. I mean, COVID killed it, and
right.
Glad to see it come back because I like it when people take chances and try new things.
Yeah.
I know that maybe the majority of folks out there think differently because they like to pile on when somebody fails.
Yeah.
But you risk that potential failures is an essential part of it.
Yeah,
So,
and it was, I mean, for the product that was, for the short time it was there, it seemed like it was doing well. They had learned their lessons.
Yeah.
Ratings were obviously better, even though, from what I recall, ratings were starting to fall by the 5th week, but they weren't a massive drop off.
Yeah.
Comparatively. And you had, for the most part, and I think most of the stadiums, decent crowds too. So there was a momentum, but then the pandemic hits and everything, and here we are, version 3.0. And before we end here, let's just, if you don't mind, have you watched any of the games so far?
I have, yeah. I watched the opening weekend, and then I've watched games here and there, at least parts of them as as the weeks progressed. And the thing is, look, anytime you start something new, here's a good example. Take a popular TV show or a TV show that you really like.
Right.
Often, and not every time, but often, the first few episodes or even the first season, the writers are still working out the kinks. They're still working out the characters, right?
Kind of like Seinfeld. It was not a hit coming right out of the box.
Yeah. Seinfeld didn't hit its stride until maybe like season 3, 4, 5, something like that. Like you watch the first season of Seinfeld,
it's horrible. It's almost unwatchable now.
Yeah. It's just because they're figuring out what it is, right? And that's a writer's room with maybe 12 to 20 people in it. This is a football league with hundreds of people involved.
Yeah.
And it's not something you can script. So a league like this needs time to develop.
Yeah.
All the people who are behind the scenes who are putting it together, they need to figure out how to work together and figure out what this league is, because it starts out on a piece of paper.
Right.
Then it becomes a living, breathing thing.
Mm-hmm.
And it needs, I'm not even talking about the coaches and the players and all that.
I mean, there's so many elements just from, like you said, coaching that, but then also the marketing side, the merchandising, the advertisement. I know I on social media, get kind of mouthy when it comes to a lot of things. Yeah. But the marketing is a key component, because I know, like in the CFL, it seems like there isn't marketing, and CFL fans are very vocal about that. And so there's just so many elements to make a league. But like you said, it does take time. It takes more than one season.
Yep. Yeah. And that was one thing that killed I think the initial XFL. Setting aside all the comedy that honestly wasn't very funny. They should have taken more time to develop the league. From the day that Vince McMahon announced the XFL, when he didn't have NBC as a partner yet, to the day that the first XFL game kicked off, it was 1 year to the day.
Yeah.
And that's not enough time.
That's not enough time.
Especially when your goal is to reinvent sports TV. You're going to do it in 1 year.
Right.
So I'm glad to see that the XFL is back. I'm glad to see that they're focusing on straight football, and I hope that they're going to get an opportunity to develop.
Yeah, and also too, you've got, I think the XFL this time around benefits from having a competitor in the spring too, because they're basically kind of able to learn from each other. And I mean, I would not be surprised in the next 3 years. Yeah, maybe those two leagues kind of come, join forces and put their heads together and like, how do we make this work permanently? And we're talking, of course, about the second version of the USFL. So,
Sure.
Before we run, can you tell everybody how to find you, what you're working on? Obviously, now let me ask you this, because you're a reporter, so your main beat then is national security.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And are people able to find those articles online too? Because I always I can't remember if the Wall Street Journal is paywalled or not. So that's why I'm asking.
It is. Yeah. Sometimes we drop that wall down, but yeah. So just the basic rundown is I work at the Wall Street Journal. I'm part of our national security group. I do a lot of like Russia, Ukraine related stuff.
Okay.
I used to live over in that part of the world, actually, right after the XFL book published in Moscow, and so all the articles that I write for the Wall Street Journal are there on the site, easily discoverable, and of course I have all the regular stuff like Twitter and a website and all that, and then Long Bomb is as we talked about earlier is I've reissued it just now, and sort of like a 20th anniversary edition with a new foreword that sort of gives us an opportunity to look back at what the XFL gave us, and at least the first go around, and that we have that in ebook and paperback and an audio book up on Amazon.
It is nice to have finally a Kindle version of it, because that was one of those. Yours was amongst many of those hardcover books that I had to part with before I came to Japan. I did give it to a good. It's when it comes to books, I always treat books like puppies. Always want to give books to a good home, and all my football books went to a gentleman by the name of Randy Snow, host of World of Football podcast, great guy. Okay. And I remember, because we were going through the books, I was literally loading up his car, but then I go, "Have you ever read this book?" No. I go, "You need to read it." And this was over the summer before things. And so he took your book and many others back home, and he did get back with me, and he goes, "Oh my God, this is great."
Thanks for doing it.
No, it was, I always hate it when I have a book by an author who I'm friends with, and I have to part with it. Had to do that with Scott Adamson too, my co-host from the 55-yard line. I'm like, "Dude, yeah, you didn't have a Kindle version, so I had to give your hard copy away because I couldn't take it with me." And it's like, well, I already read the book, so it's like I needed to find a good home for it. So,
well, book, I'd get email messages from friends from time to time over the years, because the book went out of print, and they would say, your Long Bomb on Amazon is now they're pricing it at like $600 or something. They just weren't around. I said, well, it's certainly not worth that much.
Well, you know what? It's interesting. Old football books like yours, it's no joke. I mean, the $1 league about the USFL, and the same when the getting's good about the World Football League. Yeah, yours is in that category of hard to find books. I mean, literally, to me, your book is the definitive history of the XFL, and you write it in such a way. Your journalism background comes through. I mean, I love reading history books by journalists because it's just a different feel. It flows. It feels like a novel, though I know it's not a novel, and yours without going too fanboy on you. Yours was a great read, and I did appreciate reading it. And I'm looking, I'm working my way, rereading it again too. So, but
well, I should tell you also, I mean, just because we're talking about it, sorry to interrupt, but I have a new book coming out in a couple of months. So in May, I have a book.
Anything you can reveal?
Yeah. That one's all up on Amazon as well for pre-order, but it's called Lost Son. And I've spent years on it. And it's an expansion of an article I did for the Wall Street Journal about a young man from Michigan who gets tangled up with the FBI, starts for them in counterterrorism, and then when the war in Ukraine starts in 2014, not long after that, he goes to Russia and disappears. And it's about the book is about his parents effort to find out what happened to him, the FBI's sort of cover up of their knowledge and involvement.
Oh, wow.
And it's really also just like a coming of age story of this young man, and how he gets a complete amateur, how he gets pulled into the world of professional intelligence and gets tangled up with the Russian war in Ukraine.
Oh, wow. Wow. Well, definitely. I'll definitely take a look at it and pre-order it here. And we'll talk about it more after we hit the stop button on this, because I can, in my former life, I was an intelligence officer with the Navy. So we'll talk more on the flip side of this.
I have some questions for you, man.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. All right, man. Well, listen, Brett, thank you very much for sitting down with me. And hey, everybody who's listening, thank you for listening. And we will be talking to you again very soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Greg.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.